Welcome to Machiavelli and the Ivory Tower. Our guest today is Dr. Siegfried Hecker, who is the former director of Los Alamos National Laboratory and one of this country's most honored nuclear scientists. Dr. Hecker has recently joined CNS as a distinguished professor of practice, and we are so thrilled that he could be with us here today. Sig, welcome, and thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Hanna, for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Oh, we do too. So Sig, let me start us off here. You have a forthcoming book with Elliot Serban, which is called Hinge Points, an inside look at North Korea's nuclear program. And in this book, you offer an account of the North Korean nuclear issue that really tracks the nuclear and political developments in that country side by side and analyzes, how they intersected and the points at which they diverged. And part of what you argue is that Pyongyang was following what you call a dual track strategy of diplomacy and nuclear development. And you identify in your book a number of these key moments, which you call hinge points, where Washington failed to sort of weigh the risks and rewards presented by a particular combination of those nuclear and political factors. So I'm hoping you can start us off by helping us kind of set the scene here and explain a little bit more about what the DPRK's dual track strategy really was, and maybe tell us a bit more about your new book itself.
Well, thank you. The book was a long time in the making, I must say, probably altogether about 4 years. But it's slated to come out by Stanford University Press on January 10th for public release. So it's close, and I'll be happy when it finally happens. So as far as you indicated, one of the main points to try to make is the fact that the United States government really did not understand the North Korean approach and sort of the North Korean motives, the drivers for North Korea. And what I posit in the book is to say that they've had this dual track strategy. Actually, if I go back in dual track, I can go all the way back to essentially right after the Korean War, where the dual track of Kim Il-sung, the leader, was really, it was a nuclear track with civilian and military applications. And so he focused early on civilian because he was able to get help from the Soviet Union, but he always had the military, as part of his agenda. So that was the dual track part. However, then what I focus on in the book is the dual track that I believe actually came to be at the end of the Cold War. So as the Soviet Union collapsed, Kim Il-sung at that point decided that perhaps he needed to explore diplomacy with the United States, because in essence, he was being abandoned by the Soviet Union. And in fact, he was, because after the dissolution, President Yeltsin from Russia essentially had no use for the North Koreans. And so their benefactors all of a sudden were gone. And China, which had been a longtime friend and ally, recognized South Korea. And so North Korea at that point said, perhaps we're actually better off by trying to reach strategic accommodation with the United States. And so from that point on, so this is the early 1990s, the dual track that I believe that the North Koreans pursued was diplomacy, but also, so I'll just call it the nuclearization, both the civilian, but especially on the military end. And so that's what they followed then for the next 30 years. And eventually, when we get to where we are today, may not be anymore that way today, but it certainly was through 2019. And what happened during that time, and what I describe in the book, is that they never abandoned either track. They never fully abandoned diplomacy, although they were very serious about diplomacy. And that was one of the problems on the US government side. A lot of our administration just never believed that these North Koreans were serious about diplomacy. Well, they were serious about diplomacy, but they also kept the nuclear weapons hedge. And so whether diplomacy or the nuclearization was either up or down depended then on lots of factors. Obviously the external factors, as far as the United States is concerned, relationship with South Korea, the domestic factors, their technical advancement in the nuclear program. All of those things govern it. And so what I track in the book is how that dual track went back and forth. And at various times, we had opportunities to try to come to some closure with the North Koreans. And those are the things we call the hinge points, sort of pivotal moments. And that's where, for the most part, we made the wrong decisions.